Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface. And from our last episode to this one, we're going to continue our conversation about Pope Leo. I want to start with Father Boniface's thoughts about it, as I have a great deal of questions as well to add on top of this. So, Father, I know that you have some burning thoughts, and I want you to share them with the audience.
Well, and I have to acknowledge, this episode is a couple weeks out, and other things may have happened and arisen in the meantime. And so these are my thoughts as of May 13th, if I
Fair
can
enough.
say that. And but I think in terms of his history, obviously, is not going to change in the next couple of weeks. He will have a chance. You asked me about how does a pope emerge, like what does he do? And the very first, he appeared on the balcony, and the last couple of popes have done that in different ways. Pope John Paul was the first non-Italian pope elected in over 400 years. And he started out by, I think he said a little bit in Polish, and then he spoke in Italian, and he said, I'm a Polak. You're going to have to help me with my Italian, and he was very humble and beautiful about that. Pope Benedict, I think he may have even spoken in Latin, actually. I mean, just like, anyway, he was so Roman by the time that he was elected. And Pope Francis said very little and spoke, and he really spoke as Bishop of Rome. That was one of the things that emerged. You've elected me as, Rome was having such a hard time finding a bishop that they went all the way to the ends of the earth in Argentina to select the next Bishop of Rome. He had a couple of little funny lines, and but Pope Leo had a text prepared, and that is to say, there was a fair amount of space between the white smoke and about an hour plus, hour and 15 minutes later, that he emerged on the loggia. And in that time, he had to put on his white cassock and those clothes, and he also hand wrote a text. He didn't have it like typed out, prepared, but he wanted to write something. And that tells us something about him. He wants to have a text that was very beautiful. It was very heartfelt. It wasn't, cold or rigid in any way, but it was well prepared. It wasn't going to be kind of off the cuff, and he wanted it to be, he's sort of intentional about that. And then he spoke in Italian, and then he spoke a little bit in Spanish, because he had been bishop of a diocese in Peru and had been a missionary there even longer ago than that. I think he was in Peru, I can't remember, 15 or 20 years, about 8 years as bishop, until 2023. So very recent experience. And he made a comment in the Spanish address to his people from his former diocese: thank you also for forming me. So that's something very important for us to take note of. And then, he spoke. The next official statement that he made was the next morning, as is traditional. He had mass with the cardinals. Again, he had a very nicely prepared text, prepared in enough time that it could be translated into the normal languages and distributed. I got a translated copy since we broadcasted on WAOB. A few minutes before the mass, they sent us the translation, and so I could read that. He read it word for word. He wasn't going off script and those kinds of things, except his very first words of his homily were in English. And I almost fell over to hear American English emerge from the lips of the Pope. I was like, what is happening? I don't know what's happening. And he just said, it's very sweet. He said, I've prepared a homily in Italian, but I want to address you in a few words in English. And I repeat the words of the response in the responsorial psalm. And he, quoted them and translated them into English, and then addressed a few words to his brother cardinals who had elected him. And it was just so disorienting to hear him speak English. So, but now what's going to happen is he's addressing the cardinals, he's addressing the curia. He's going to start having some masses. The first will be his inauguration mass, May 18th. So again, this episode will come out after then, but I don't have that text yet, so I can only guess what will be there. But that homily will be significant. It's not like he's setting out his first 100 days there, but it certainly will be the most substantial. He'll have several days to prepare it. It's addressed to the whole world. There'll be a huge mass in St. Peter's Square for his inauguration, and that'll be a big deal. A lot of eyes will be on him, and that'll be really important. Pope Francis's
So
Go ahead.
a question about that, because I know that I've asked you before about homilies, and you've told me that they need to be correlated, or at least they're supposed to be correlated to the gospel of that mass that's taking place. Does the Pope have power to basically talk about whatever he wants, and whether it's about the actual gospel of that particular mass, does it matter or not?
Well, actually, the instruction for the homily is that it should be drawn from the readings or the texts of the Mass or the kind of liturgical occasion of the day. So today is the feast of Our Lady of Fatima. If the priest were to preach about Fatima the whole Mass, that would be perfectly reasonable to do that.
Okay.
So the Pope also is not bound by that. However, so it'll be a Sunday. May 18th will be the fifth Sunday of Easter, I guess. I think he would use the readings of the day. He's ultimately the Pope is the divine, if not the divine, but the supreme legislator, and so he can actually change that stuff. He has the authority to do that,
Yeah.
and he could change the liturgy of the text. But I'm guessing, for a variety of reasons, because he's formed in this. He's now the first Pope who's really formed after Vatican II. He's 69 years old, so he was barely alive before Vatican II. Really, his whole life has been formed after Vatican II, and that approach of using the readings and preaching from that is a very post-conciliar approach to things. And I'm guessing we'll see that from him primarily. We'll see. But anyway, he'll probably use the text of the day. The last two popes that I'm aware of their inaugural homilies, they used the text of the day. Pope Francis was actually inaugurated on the Feast of St. Joseph, and he used those texts, and he used St. Joseph, and also spoke about who he is as Pope, successor of Peter, and what the papal office is about as supreme shepherd, and the way that he will shepherd his people. And Pope Benedict did a similar thing, drawing on the readings of the day, but then also really reflecting. He was reflecting on the symbols of the papacy. So the Pope wears oh, it'll come back to me, a pallium. So it's made of lamb skin, like the shepherd who carries the lamb around his shoulders. And the Pope also wears a ring, the fisherman's ring, and the Pope wears a pectoral cross. I think were the three things that he reflected on in that homily. Oh, and the staff also. A bishop would also have that. But anyway, he reflected on those dimensions of the papacy, which were very relevant to the events of the day, the inauguration. He's receiving those different items as symbols of his office, and he was reflecting on those, teaching from them. So we'll see what Pope Leo does, how he will incorporate the readings or the dimensions of the papacy, the insignia, or something else. He brought in the words of the risen Christ in his first words from the Loggia of Blessings of St. Peter's Basilica when he emerged, when he was announced. He came forth and he said, "Peace be with you." These words of the risen Christ are addressed to us, and we are to extend them to our own friends and family, etc. And he went on from there. So he'll have his inaugural Mass in St. Peter's Square. Then he will do what's called taking possession. That is to say, he'll assert, like, these are mine, for the major basilicas. The Cathedral Basilica of St. John Lateran. That's where the Pope's cathedra, his chair, is. That's his official church. Also the St. Peter's Basilica, St. Mary Major, and St. Paul outside the walls. And those four major masses will take place over the next couple of months. He also is trying to resume Pope Francis's plans to go visit Turkey. So we'll see how quickly that's able to unfold. And that, so that and a number of other events that will be of his choosing and ways that he chooses to engage people. And he'll start to deliver homilies. He'll hold Wednesday audiences. And we saw from Pope Francis in like October or November, I think, his first major document, which was The Joy of the Gospel. And I wouldn't be surprised if some similar timeline in the next 4 to 6 months, we see some kind of major writing from Pope Leo that will be something, probably defining. Generally, that first encyclical, first exhortation is, sets a tone for the whole pontificate, really.
And that makes sense. So in the last episode, you mentioned how Pope Francis, one of the reasons he chose the name Francis was emphasis to keep what I assume is also the Franciscan mission, the poor in front of you. What is the significance, or who is the saint of Saint Leo in which the Pope has chosen to be named after? I believe he's the 14th, right? So certainly not. Regardless, he's not the first one to do this. What is the significance of Leo? Is ultimately my question.
It's a good question, and I know that there has been some response to this. I'm going to cheat and give you an answer that I'm constructing in the process of giving you the answer. But the first Leo is known as Leo the Great, and he was a great figure in history in the 400s, at a time when Rome was shaky, and he actually stood against Genghis Khan and the Mongolian horde who were going to combat Rome. There's a quite famous scene that Pope Leo went out to confront him, amazingly. And it's said that Genghis Khan had a vision of an army of angels behind Pope Leo when he came out to confront him, and he stopped and he turned back. So Pope Leo is a great defender of the faith that way, but also a great defender of the faith against heresy. He ratified one of the Council of Chalcedon, in which the Christ was proclaimed as true God and true man, so that we understand correctly who he is. There was a lot of fighting over how to express that. And anyway, Pope Leo did a number of things in his teaching, in his papal office, that were significant. And so all of the other Leos are, the second, third, fourth, etc. He's the first. The most recent Leo was Leo XIII, who was the third longest reigning pontiff. I think or maybe the fourth. In any event, quite a lengthy. So Pius IX, John Paul II, and Saint Peter the Apostle are, I think, the only three pontiffs reigning longer than Leo XIII. And I might even have one of them out of order. But Leo XIII did a lot. He wrote 85 encyclicals. They were short, but still, 85 encyclicals is a lot. He promoted Marian devotion. The St. Michael the Archangel prayer was composed by Leo XIII, and a whole chapter in the rite of exorcism that contains that prayer was put in place by him, because
during the Crusades when that prayer became a thing.
No. So
what timeline was he in? I guess is my question I'm trying to figure out here.
Oh, the end of the 19th century.
Okay, so the 1800s, late 1800s. Okay.
Late 1800s, exactly. So he I'd have to think. Well, anyway, it would be easy enough to find out. But the end of the 1800s, the reason I asked that
in terms of names adopted by the popes, it's not like this one, for lack of a better way, went out of style and then he just picked something out from way long ago. It's probably within the last 10 popes of Leo XIII, ballpark guess.
Yeah, he was pope from 1878 to 1903.
Okay.
So,
and you recognize that John Paul II was one of the longest ones. So if you look at in terms of most recent names, Pope Leo would certainly be in the last 10. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So Leo XIII, as it's coming out, one of the reasons that our new Pope Leo XIV chose his name is that he said, in our own day, that Leo XIII is also known for his great social encyclical Rerum Novarum. Leo XIII was Pope during the Industrial Revolution, and in kind of the wake of that, where workers were really being turned into, it's the same thing that led to the communist revolution, is the commodification of workers, as they were used as, objectified, whatever, used as capital in factories, essentially. And so he taught into that. He delivered the church's, the gospel into the realm of social teaching. And Rerum Novarum is a a watershed document. The church has issued another 7 or 8 social encyclicals since then. Rerum Novarum is really the font of all of those. And so that's a significant dimension of Leo XIII's papacy. And apparently, Leo XIV said in his address to cardinals a couple days ago that he said, in our own day, the church offers to everyone the treasury of her social teaching in response to another industrial revolution and to developments in the field of artificial intelligence that pose new challenges for the defense of human dignity, justice, and labor. So that's an interesting note on that question. So he fashions himself because of the great questions, the challenges in our own time around those issues that he wants to be able to bring the
don't want to go on a
wisdom of
soapbox, but
Christ.
that's probably the greatest social issue of our day, I'd say without even a doubt. You find that with the algorithms of social networking. I mean, at least from an American perspective, I don't think there's any other two things, and you could argue they're one and the same, that are affecting society and life more than AI and social networks. I did not know that was his starting answer. That is phenomenal. And you said that in all probability within 6 months he will have written an encyclical about that. So you mentioned encyclicals a couple of times here, and you also mentioned in the last episode that the Pope cannot change doctrine. So is an encyclical doctrine, and what does that mean to those who read it and want to follow it, etc.?
Yeah, so for example, Rerum Novarum by Leo XIII was what we call really the first social encyclical, because it was addressing really new social issues that had emerged, child labor, or people being forced to work 7 days a week and losing sight of the dignity of the person. Oppressive structures and a caste system that was emerging between workers and capital and owners. So he's just applying the teaching of the gospel. He's not changing the teaching. He's applying it to the issues of the day, and with the same principles. What's the primary principle? The dignity of the human person. And then what's another principle of the church's social teaching? Well, solidarity, that we are one family. We're united in this. And so that was ultimately the great war cry of John Paul II that brought down communism, was the cry of solidarity. And then also we look at subsidiarity, which is to say that the governing authority closest to the situation should make the decisions as much as possible. So it's a contrary to overreach and micromanaging, you might say. The Pope should not be stepping in and saying, Bishop Zubik in the Diocese of Pittsburgh, you need to not combine these two parishes, and you need to, not ordain this person. It's like, no, you let the bishop do the local work, you let the pastor do the local work. So subsidiarity is reinforcing that. And then something like the universal destination of goods. God intends for everybody to have what they need. God intends for everybody to have food and clothing and shelter and enough of what they need in order to thrive in their humanity. How does he get that to each person? Well, not too many people that he rains it down from heaven on. He distributes it through families. He distributes it through business owners. He distributes it through governments. He distributes it through charity. God distributes goods to each, at least to their needs. And then that helps us to understand that, well, rich people are not a problem. In fact, it's really important a lot of times to have rich people who know how to distribute goods through procuring services, employing workers, building industries, making investments, as well as gifts and charity to those who need it. And so, but the rich getting, anyway, so the distortions on that, the Scrooges,
so basically the calling of developing your own talents so that you're able to not just produce so that there is enough for everyone, but then be able to utilize in the way of the embodiment of the church. Father, I feel like I can ask you like 17 questions worth right now. And once again, I've gotten us right up to the last line and right when you're in a roll. So for everyone listening, I know that you keep growing every week. It's mind-boggling. It's truly humbling looking at both the individual episode numbers, the monthly numbers, the cumulative numbers, as far as what we have done as a podcast, going from literally zero to where we are at now. And again, we've never done any advertising. It has all been by word of mouth. And we thank you all for listening, being with us. Please click share, as next week we are going to talk more about the new Pope Leo and diving in with some additional questions that I have about him. So thank you all for listening, and we will be with you again next week.